didn't realize I had disappeared until someone looked at me like I still existed. He walked into my office like he'd been here before. Not physically, no, but in some other sense, like memory or myth. The air changed my hands, steady for decades, faltered slightly as I reached for my pen. I didn't write anything Liam Cross, mid to late 20s, calm, poised, not the usual kind of man who ends up across from me. Ridgewood isn't exactly brimming with men his age seeking therapy, especially not ones who look like him, like a painting someone tried too hard not to admire. His cheekbones caught the light when he turned, casting faint shadows on his face, his hair messy, but with intention. And that look, that gaze, focused, unyielding, it wasn't curiosity. It wasn't intimidation. It was awareness, like he already knew too much. I should have begun with the checklist. That's the protocol: name, history, meds. But what slipped from my lips instead was, "You don't seem like someone who'd need therapy." His mouth curled, not a smirk, not mockery, just knowing. "You'd be surprised," he said, voice low but unforced. "I think I hide myself too well." That made something pause in me, not break, but shift. I looked down. My notepad lay blank in my lap, like it too had lost its purpose. He didn't fidget, didn't avoid eye contact. He crossed one leg over the other and tapped his fingers lightly against his knee, like he had nowhere else to be. "I usually see people when they're unraveling," I said, adjusting in my seat, looking for someone to sew them back together. "And what if I'm not unraveling?" he asked. I smiled, too easily. "Then maybe you're just here to test if I've got the right thread." He tilted his head. A single breath of space between us thickened. "I want to understand," he said, "why I affect people the way I do." I should have redirected, steered the conversation back to charts, goals, therapeutic outcomes. But instead, "How do you affect people, Liam?" His eyes dropped barely to my mouth, held there, then rose slowly. "I think you already know." And just like that, my breath caught, not because of desire, not yet, something deeper, something older, that part of the soul that stops functioning properly when it hasn't been noticed in too long. I remembered Thomas, my husband, sitting at home, probably half asleep in the recliner, phone screen painting his face in cold light. We hadn't touched in. I didn't even know anymore. A year, maybe more. "Are you married?" Liam asked. I blinked. 43 years, I answered, before realizing he hadn't even asked out loud. "I could feel it," he said, "in the way you held your posture, like a door that used to open, but doesn't anymore." I should have told him to stop, but part of me wanted to ask what else he could feel. That's when I knew he hadn't come here to be helped. He came to watch me remember what it felt like to be alive. I didn't realize I had disappeared until someone looked at me like I still existed. The door opened at 2:58, not early enough to impress, not late enough to raise a flag, just intentional. He walked in wearing a dark jacket that clung to him in the way expensive things do, unshowy, but perfectly tailored. His shoes were clean, hair disheveled, but styled like it meant to be. He didn't ask, if he was in the right place, didn't hesitate. He moved like he knew where to sit, like he belonged in that chair across from me. "Liam Cross," he said, extending a hand. I shook it. His palm was warm, dry, confident. I introduced myself. Evelyn Hartley, clinical therapist, 40 years in the field. Dozens of people walked through this office each week. Some talked too much, some not at all. Most cried. Liam didn't look like he cried. He looked like someone who made other people cry, and didn't know why. I gestured for him to sit. He crossed his legs, tapped his fingertips slowly against the side of his thigh. His body was still, but something about him wasn't. Like a storm humming just beneath the skin, he studied the room, not with awe, with awareness. His eyes paused on the bookshelf, then the window, then me. That's when it happened, the shift. That sharp, silent moment when someone stops looking at you and starts seeing you. I straightened slightly, unsure why it felt like being pulled into light after sitting too long in shadow. "You don't strike me as the kind of person who needs therapy," I said. The words left before I could stop them. He smiled with only half his mouth. "I've been told I hide things too well." I didn't write that down. Instead, I watched the way his shoulders moved as he leaned in, just enough to close the space. "I want to understand why I affect people the way I do." There was a stillness between us, not awkward, loaded, like a glass of water filled too close to the rim. Most patients want relief, clarity, escape. Liam sounded like he wanted confirmation. "And how do you think you affect people?" His gaze dropped, slow, deliberate, to my lips, then lifted back up with practiced ease. "I think you already know." Something stirred in me, not heat, not lust. Something more dangerous, a flicker of being known, of being seen not as the therapist, not as the wife, not as the older woman in the silk blouse and pressed trousers, but as something else. He said nothing more. And yet, the silence between us felt thick enough to drown in. My pen hadn't moved. I hadn't taken a single note. That never happens. When the session ended, I stood too quickly. My hand brushed the desk to steady myself. Liam thanked me, said he looked forward to next week. And when the door closed behind him, the room didn't feel the same. It felt hollow, like he'd taken something with him, or maybe left something behind. I sat there for a long time, notebook open, pen still in hand. I told myself to pull it together, that I was imagining things, that it was just another client. But something had cracked, not loudly, just enough. And I wasn't ready to admit that. I wanted it to. The house was quiet when I got home, too quiet, but not in the eerie way, in the familiar way. Thomas was exactly where I left him, slouched on the living room couch, feet up, glasses sliding halfway down his nose. His phone, the ever-glowing rectangle of his attention, lit his face in that sterile, unnatural blue. He didn't look up. I waited. Still nothing. My heels clicked deliberately against the hardwood floor as I set my bag down on the kitchen counter, a little louder than necessary. I hoped for a glance, even a grunt, something that might suggest I wasn't just air moving through the house. Nothing. He chuckled softly at the screen. Probably a video of a raccoon opening a fridge, or a man in a tiny house building a bread oven. It didn't matter anymore. I leaned against the counter, watched him. Really looked. The man I married 43 years ago. His hair had thinned, belly softened. His shirts, once crisp and buttoned, now hung loose, faded from too many cycles in the washer. His fingers tapped aimlessly against his chest. And there he was, my husband, my forever, so casual in his invisibility. I went upstairs without saying a word. In the mirror, I didn't find anger, I found grief, not sharp, not loud, but dull and endless, like a faucet that never fully stops dripping. I undressed slowly, let the fabric fall without ceremony. The silk blouse I'd worn all day lay, crumpled at my feet like a second skin I no longer needed. The bathroom lights glowed warm. I studied my face, noted the lines, the softness around the jaw, the shadows that time had carved into the edges of my eyes. I reached up, touched one of them lightly. It didn't fade. I turned on the shower, let the steam rise. And then, as the water hit my shoulders, something surfaced, a thought, a face, Liam's, his voice, the way it lingered, the way his gaze made the room feel smaller, the way he made me feel still sharp, still vivid, alive. A breath escaped me, not planned, not performed, just there, spilling out of me like air, escaping a sealed jar. I stood in that warmth for what felt like hours. Let the water trace every edge of me. Let it soften the places I'd forgotten to feel. And in that moment, the silence inside me cracked open, just enough for him to slip through. By the time I stepped out, the house still hadn't changed. But I had. I put on the silk nightgown, the one I used to wear when Thomas and I would stay up late, talking about nothing and everything, when his eyes used to linger, when my laughter didn't feel like a performance. It felt strange now, like putting on someone else's memory. I went back downstairs. He didn't notice, didn't even blink, just muttered something about being thirsty. Could you get me some water? That was it, no compliment, no question. No sense that I was a woman standing in front of him, with bare feet, on cold tile, and memories stitched into fabric. Just a request. I grabbed the bottle, unscrewed it harder than I needed to, handed it to him without a word. He didn't thank me. I sat beside him anyway. The television was playing something, laugh tracks, maybe. I stared at the screen, not seeing it. And beside me, he laughed, at a joke that wasn't mine, at a life that no longer included me. After a moment, he said, "That's wild," pointing at something on the screen. "How do they even do that?" I nodded. And I think that nod was the loneliest thing I'd done all day. I stood. He didn't ask where I was going. Didn't follow, didn't see back upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed, the room dim and still. I breathed in slowly and realized, with a clarity that stung, he hadn't left me. I'd simply faded, one quiet evening at a time. He arrived again, same time, Same calm, like the first session had simply paused and resumed. Liam, I said, nodding. He smiled faintly, slid into the chair without a word. No small talk, no preamble. The air settled differently when he was there, thicker, slower. He sat with the same casual confidence, legs crossed, fingers tapping rhythmically against his knee. That rhythm, it wasn't random. It had cadence, control, like he was measuring the silence between us. "How was your week?" I asked, though my voice sounded thinner than I intended. "Uneventful," he said, eyes scanning the room again. "Yours?" I hesitated. That wasn't part of the dynamic. He wasn't supposed to ask me that, but I answered anyway. "Quiet," he smirked. "You don't like quiet, do you?" That stopped me. I've grown used to it. That's not what I asked. My breath hitched barely. But he noticed. He always noticed. I shifted in my seat, adjusted the angle of my notepad, still blank. "Liam, what brought you here?" I asked, trying to regain direction. He tilted his head. Loneliness, maybe curiosity, guilt. That last word lingered. He didn't expand, just let it hang there like fog. "You mentioned you affect people. What did you mean by that?" He looked at me for a long time before answering, not evasive, just deliberate. "People feel things around me, they open, sometimes without meaning to." My throat felt dry. I cleared it, adjusted my posture. "I see. Do you?" he asked. His eyes met mine, not searching, not confrontational, just unwavering. And then, slowly, they dropped, not by accident, not out of shyness. They traced a path, cheek, jaw, neckline. They stopped. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just looked long enough for it to register. And I didn't stop him. I should have. I should have said something clinical, redirected the moment, set a boundary. Instead, I let the silence fill the space between us again. A silence not made of absence, but of something swelling, something warm and wrong. I swallowed. "Liam," I said, tone tighter than I liked. "Therapy isn't about attraction." He didn't flinch. "It's about truth, isn't it?" I exhaled sharply. "Truth doesn't need to stare like that." He leaned in slightly, just enough for me to feel it in the temperature between us. "Sometimes it does." I should have left it there. I should have stood. But instead, I smiled, soft, uncertain, too open. He caught it, held it. "You haven't been touched in a while," he said, quiet, not cruel, just obvious. My mouth parted to object, but no words came. "You wear silk," he continued, "but not for anyone. Your lipstick's fresh when I arrive, gone by the time I leave. Your eyes dart to the clock every 6 minutes. Not because you're bored, because you want this hour to stretch." He was right, every word. And it undid me, not in action, but in awareness. In the terrifying feeling that someone finally, actually, saw me. He leaned back, gave me space. But the damage had been done. "Why say those things?" I asked, more fragile than I meant. "Because it's true." "And what does that give you?" He smiled again, that maddening, beautiful half-smile. "Just clarity," he said. "I like knowing where things are buried." I couldn't speak, because part of me had just been dug up, and I hadn't even realized I'd buried it. He didn't show up. I checked the clock again. 3:05. Session was at 3. He was never late, not even once. I sat perfectly still at my desk, pen in hand, notebook open. The page remained blank, just like last week. I told myself to move on, log the absence, shift focus to the next client. But my eyes kept flicking to the door, to the phone, to the minute hand crawling toward 3:10 like it knew I was waiting. I pulled out my phone. No missed calls, no messages, nothing. The stillness around me grew unbearable. Most clients miss sessions all the time. They forget. They reschedule. It means nothing. But this wasn't most clients. This was Liam. And it meant something. By 3:15, I felt ridiculous, not for being stood up, but for how disappointed I felt. I told myself I was only concerned from a professional standpoint. A missed session could indicate backsliding or emotional withdrawal but I knew better. I knew what I was doing when I pressed his name in my contact list. I knew the tremble in my finger wasn't just age. He picked up on the second ring. "Doc," he said, breathless, like he'd been running. "I'm so sorry." His voice was too warm, too intimate. I got caught up, but I didn't want to miss our time. I closed my eyes, took a breath. "We'll have to reschedule," I said. There was a pause. A small sound in the background, voices, dishes, the clink of a coffee spoon. "What about later, say 7? I should have said no. I should have reminded him that I don't take clients after hours, that the boundaries matter, that I matter. But before I could even think it through, I heard myself say, "Would you mind coming to my home instead?" Silence then. "You want me to come to your house?" I swallowed. "I won't be in the office. And if you're serious about not missing the session." Another pause. I could almost feel his smile through the phone. "That's different," he said. I waited. "Why not?" He added, voice low, steady. I gave him the address, hung up, and sat in the silence that followed, the kind that makes you wonder who just spoke, and why it sounded so much like Yuan, so little like yourself. Back home, I moved around the house like a woman, rehearsing for a part she never auditioned for. I fluffed the pillows, straightened picture frames, lit a candle I hadn't used in years. Thomas was on the couch, as usual, his world narrowed into a screen, the glow dancing across his face. I didn't tell him right away. When I finally did, his response was a low hum, his thumb still scrolling. "Client missed his appointment, asked if he could come by after work." I said yes. He looked up briefly. "Here," I nodded. That was it. Not concern, not suspicion, just a blink, then back to the screen. As if bringing a strange man into our home was just another muted moment in the noise. My heart didn't race, not because I was calm, but because it had already started beating faster hours Agond hadn't stopped since. At 6:58, I sat in the armchair across the room. My hands rested on my lap, folded tightly. The seconds dragged. At 7:03, the doorbell rang. And suddenly, I was standing. I smoothed my sweater, took one breath, then another. I opened the door. There he was, Liam Raines, still clinging to his hair, leather jacket damp, eyes lit with something unspoken. "Evening, Doc," he said, not nervous, not surprised, just like he'd always been there, and like I had always been waiting. He stepped inside like he belonged there, like he knew every inch of the hallway, though he'd never seen it before. The door clicked shut behind us. I didn't mean to do it so firmly. My hand had just moved. Liam stood still for a second, eyes scanning the space, the framed photographs, the bookshelves, the low lamplight spilling across hardwood floors. I felt the house breathe differently from the living room. Thomas's voice drifted out, muffled, distracted. "Who's that?" I cleared my throat. "This is Liam, the client who missed today. He needed the session." Thomas glanced up from his phone. Eyes met Liam's, then mine. Huh. Then back to the screen. That was it. No questions. No pause. Just that familiar shrug of apathy that had become the rhythm of our marriage. Liam said nothing. But I saw it, the shift in his expression. A flicker of something between amusement and recognition. As if he understood more about this house than I'd ever said aloud. "Come on," I said. My voice felt smaller than usual. "We'll use the library." He followed me down the hallway. The room smelled faintly of old paper and dried lavender. It was the one place in the house that still felt like mine. Once inside, I closed the door, locked it, soft, barely audible, but loud enough. Liam turned. His gaze touched the doorknob, then drifted back to me, expecting interruptions. "Habit," I said, a lie that came too easily. He didn't push it. He sank into the armchair with ease, elbow resting along the side, legs slightly apart, relaxed, settled. "You really do take your job seriously," he said, his voice low. "I try to. And do all your sessions come with candlelight?" I hadn't noticed the candle until he said it. I'd lit it earlier, muscle memory, maybe, or hope. I looked at him, really looked. The dampness in his hair had begun to dry. A single strand curled forward across his forehead. His jaw was dusted in faint stubble. He watched me watching him. I moved to the opposite chair, sat, crossed my legs, notebook in my lap, still unopened. "You said you wanted clarity," I began. "I did. And tonight, I still do." There was a pause, a silence with weight. "You know," he said, "this house doesn't feel like it was built for silence." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it has the bones of conversation, of music, of laughter. But now it's like the echoes are tired." His words pierced, not sharp, but deep. I pressed my lips together, unsure why they trembled. "I don't usually bring clients home," I said. He nodded. "I know. You didn't ask." "I didn't need to." The air shifted again, thicker, closer. "Do you feel guilty?" he asked. I hesitated. "I haven't done anything," I replied. "But you felt things." That was the problem. I was. His eyes never left mine. And suddenly, everything around us softened, walls, edges, memories. "I've thought about this room," he said, voice lower, "before ever stepping inside." My breath caught. "Why?" "Because I imagined what it would look like when you finally allowed yourself to be seen in it." The words hung, There was no touch, but something brushed between us, something formless, like a current under skin. He leaned forward, not enough to cross space, just enough to shift gravity. And in that quiet, in that moment that never truly touched surface, something opened inside me, not my body, my silence, the part of me that hadn't spoken in years. And it spoke through breath, through pause, through the way my eyes didn't leave his. No lines were crossed, but every line blurred, until I wasn't sure whether we were still in a session, or if I had finally stepped into one of my own. I hadn't expected it to linger, but it did. The next morning, I woke with a weight pressed into my ribs, not dread, not regret, something else. A fullness, like emotion had occupied a space that had been hollow for years. The house felt unchanged. Thomas still moved like a ghost. His steps were soft, his presence quieter than the ticking of the wall clock. We passed each other in the hallway. He mumbled something about coffee. I nodded. Neither of us looked directly. Neither of us said a word that touched the skin. I moved through my day like normal. Clients came and went. I said the things I'd always said, warm, clear, rehearsed. But my mind, it drifted back to a room bathed in lamplight, to the slow, deliberate sound of Liam's voice, to the invisible line we both knew we were walking, and how it hummed like a live wire beneath our feet. I tried to ground myself in routine. Lunch at the desk, afternoon files, but everything felt slightly blurred, like the lens had shifted and no one else had noticed. At one point, a patient sat across from me, a middle-aged woman, early 40s, talking about how her husband no longer reached for her hand in public. She laughed nervously. "I know it's stupid," she said. "It's just a hand." But I didn't laugh. I swallowed something tight in my throat because I understood. It's never just a hand. It's the space where affection used to live. I nearly told her, not the whole story, but the feeling, the ache of being next to someone who only sees you in the context of grocery lists and default settings. I didn't. She wouldn't have needed the whole truth to feel its edge later. I sat in my office alone. The clock read 4:12. Liam's session wasn't scheduled that day. But I looked at the door anyway. I didn't know what I was hoping for, only that something had shifted. The strange thing wasn't how much space he took up. It was how everything else now felt too small, too quiet, too safe. That evening, I drove home slower than usual. I let the car idle in the driveway for a full 5 minutes inside. Thomas was watching a video of a man carving wood into birds. He looked up. "Hey," he said, then back to the screen. I stood there a moment, coat still on, keys still in hand. "Thomas," I said. He didn't hear me. Or maybe he did. But the man on the screen was shaping something with his hands. And that, apparently, was more compelling. I went upstairs, undressed in silence, washed my face, stared into the mirror like it might confess something back. And then I sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in my lap, and wondered what part of me touched that I hadn't realized was still capable of feeling anything at all. It started with a question, not a big one, just a flicker in my mind. Where had he come from? I typed his name into the state database, Liam Cross. No alerts, no prior records. Then I searched the university archives. I remembered him mentioning Yale, something about behavioral psychology. Or maybe he'd let that slip between other words. There he was, Liam E. Cross. Graduated with honors, a thesis on emotional displacement and self-perception in confined relationships. But no clinical credentials, no affiliations, no practice, no clients. I clicked through page after page, no LinkedIn, no licensing, no published articles. It was like he had emerged from theory, from concept, not from life. That night, I dreamt of him, but not as the man who sat across from me in the dream. He stood at the edge of a lake, his reflection fractured on the surface. He looked younger or older. I couldn't tell. His mouth moved, but no sound came. I called his name. He turned, and his face became mine. I woke up choking on breath. The sheets tangled around my legs like vines, sweat cooling on my chest. I sat upright for a long time, listening to the faint creaks of the house, the low buzz of Thomas's snore from down the hall. He hadn't touched me in almost 2 years. But Liam had touched something without laying a single finger. The next day, I tried to return to normal war gray slacks. A high-collared blouse pulled my hair back tight. At noon, I found myself back at my laptop. I searched again, Cross, psychology, Ridgewood, still nothing new. It didn't make sense. People leave traces, even ghosts do, but not Liam. And that's when it hit me. What if he wasn't here for help? What if he wasn't a client at all? What if he was a mirror sent by the universe or fate? Or the version of myself I buried years ago, not to be analyzed, but to make me feel, to make me remember. The door to my office opened at 2:59, right on time. He entered without speaking, sat in his usual spot. I looked at him differently now, not with suspicion, with reverence, like a memory given shape. And when he smiled, slow, deliberate, I wondered if he knew what I'd seen in the dream, if he'd been there too, because something in his eyes said he had. And something in me no longer wanted to wake up. It was late, the kind of late where everything feels softer. Weaker, the television hummed faintly downstairs, but the light from it didn't reach the hallway. I stood at the threshold of our bedroom. Thomas was in bed, glasses perched halfway down his nose, phone still glowing in his hand. I stepped inside. He didn't look up. "Thomas," I said quietly. He glanced over, then set the phone down. His eyes took a moment to adjust, as if I'd surprised him by simply speaking. "I need to talk to you." That sentence used to mean something, a warning, a shift, a weight. Now it just drifted through the room like dust. He sat up slightly. "Is everything okay?" I stood near the foot of the bed, my hands clenched and unclenched. "I don't think I'm okay," I said. A pause. He blinked, then nodded slowly. "What's wrong?" The question sounded mechanical, dutiful, but I answered anyway. "I feel empty, like I've been living beside myself for years. He frowned. I know we haven't been as close lately. Lately, I almost laughed. I looked down at my hands. They didn't look like mine. I've tried, I said. I really did. But there's a part of me that's gone quiet. And I can't seem to wake it up, not with you, not anymore. He didn't speak. He stared at me with the same expression he wore when watching a video buffer, mild concern, distant detachment. I wanted him to interrupt, to fight, to remind me that I mattered. But he didn't. Instead, he said, "Is there someone else?" I didn't answer, because the truth wasn't someone. It was something, a feeling, a glimpse of myself in another life, a version I hadn't seen in decades. I just wanted to be noticed again, I whispered. He looked away, and I knew, in that moment, we'd both stopped trying a long time ago. We just never said it out loud. You know, he said softly, I always thought we'd be fine, that even if we didn't talk or touch, we'd still be us. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Maybe that's the problem, I said. We got so good at being us. We forgot how to be me. Silence filled the room like fog. He didn't reach for me. I didn't expect him to. We were too deeply holding onto the shape of something that no longer had a pulse. And finally, we both heard it go quiet. It was raining again, not the loud kind, the gentle, persistent kind that soaks into everything quietly. I hadn't heard from him, not since that last session. Not a call, not a text, just silence. And still, at 6:57, I found myself sitting in the armchair. Same room, same light, waiting. The knock came at 7:03. I didn't jump this time. I stood slowly, like I already knew he'd come. When I opened the door, there he was, no jacket this time, no umbrella, just him. Wet hair clinging to his forehead, shirt damp and clinging to his chest. But his eyes, still steady, still watching. I stepped aside. He entered without a word. We walked down the hall, past Thomas, who didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't blink, just scrolled. Liam said nothing. But I felt it, the weight of it all pressing against our backs. Once in the library, I closed the door, didn't lock it. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, watching the rain drip down the glass. I didn't ask why he was here. I already knew. Is this the last time? I asked. He didn't turn. Would it matter if it was? I walked to the center of the room. Yes, I said, it would. Finally, he faced me. There was something different in his eyes tonight. Not hunger, not confidence. Something older, something tired. Why did you come into my life? I asked. To remind you, he said, that you still have one. My throat tightened. And what do I do with that now? He stepped closer. Feel it. A silence opened between us, not empty, heavy, like the pause before lightning splits the sky. What are you afraid of? He asked. That I'll want more, I whispered. His hand didn't reach for mine, but his presence pressed into my breath, my skin, the room. If this is the last time, he said, what do you want to feel? The words settled deep, not a challenge, not an invitation, a mirror. I closed my eyes, and in the dark behind them, I saw everything, the years, the silence, the ache, the version of myself that waited and waited and waited and never came. I opened my eyes, met his, and in a voice that didn't shake, I said, "Me, I want to feel me." He nodded, didn't speak, didn't move, but somehow everything inside meshifted. And for the first time in years, I felt full, even as I knew was already beginning to leave. Morning came with a gray light, soft, diffused, the kind that doesn't announce itself. I sat up slowly. The bed beside me was already empty. Thomas had left for his morning walk. Or maybe just the kitchen. I didn't check. I stayed in the quiet for a while. Listened to the distant hum of the refrigerator, the creak of old floorboards, the breath of a house that had lived through so many versions of me. Then I stood. The mirror above the dresser caught me, not in motion, not in expression, just being. The woman looking back didn't flinch. Her eyes were softer. Not because they were sad, because they had stopped trying to perform. I ran my fingers through my hair, loose, untied. And for once, I didn't reach for the lipstick or the scarf. I let the bare truth sit there, unadorned, downstairs. I brewed coffee, poured it into the ceramic mug with the tiny crack at the rim, the one I'd always meant to replace, but never did. I sat by the window. Rain had stopped sometime during the night. The world outside was wet, clean, not new, but cleared. I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked on a blank document. I stared at it for a moment, then typed, Case File 1, Evelyn Hartley, Diagnosis. Awakening, I sat back, breath catching in my chest, not from fear, from release. Upstairs, Thomas coughed. A floorboard creaked. The house stirred. And still, I stayed, because something had finally shifted inside me, not loud. But final. Liam was gone. I didn't know where. I didn't know if he'd ever existed in the way I thought he had. But I knew what he had done. He'd held up a mirror. And not just to me, to everything I had locked away, painted over, numbed. He'd shown me a reflection that still had light behind the eyes. I looked out the window again, watched a bird land on the power line, wings twitching, unsure, and I whispered, just loud enough for the morning to hear, I see her now, the woman in the glass. And this time she looked back.